Hello, everybody. Got all my books, of course. I'm the nerdy homophobe. Anyways, thanks for having me, and this has just been a wonderful conference. I wish there was 10 times as many people here. Learned so much about so many things. Definitely having some of you guys speak at some future event I'm going to hold. Of course, Scott took like half my subject matter and did it better than I would have. But by the way, Scott Lively is one of the most persecuted people on this whole issue in the whole world. Probably right up there in the top, probably 3. Scott Lively, Paul Cameron, and we have walk companies in Canada, Tony Perkins, FRC. Anyways, in case you don't know me, I've been monitoring the homosexual, bisexual, lesbian, transgender, queer and questioning, pansexual, polyamory. There's so many you can't keep track. You need a PhD to keep track of it. And it all started, I had a little publication called Lambda Report. And, some of our people like Janet, Linda Harvey, who's a real hero, who's been fighting this stuff in the schools, the propaganda in the schools. We've been at this for a long time. This is my publication I did called Lambda Report, which preceded Americans for Truth, and this is 1998. We have to laugh when we hear that some of these conservatives. I mean, I'm glad they're finally figuring it out, but they're like, the gays are in the school and they're propagandizing kids. Can you believe this? Okay, this is 1998. This is 24 years ago, where we did a story by Brian Bird, who's now an attorney, brilliant guy, and he went into, we'd go to gay activist events because I'm a reporter by background, and we want to get the story. I don't believe, I think you have to have the facts. I always tell people, be judicious. Understatement's always better than overstatement. Anyways, we came to this conference, and this one was a GLSEN, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. Used to be the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Teachers. There was a T in there for teachers. It's the leading propaganda outfit in schools, and they've had a terrible, terrible effect. But this is 24 years ago, and we're talking about grooming. Listen what, first of all, we got the head of it, Kevin Jennings, who went on to be remember he was a Safe Schools czar for Obama. Well, in this story we got, because we were there recording, Kevin Jennings of the Gay Lesbian, the CEO of the executive director of GLSEN, said that he looks forward to the day, I can envision a day when straight people say, so what, you're promoting homosexuality? Our straight kids will say to a male homosexual friend, hey, well, we put that in brackets. Of course, he would never say the word homosexual because that word was banned. Hey, why don't you and your boyfriend come over before you go to the prom and try your tuxes on at my house? See, the whole thing, this is the world they wanted, where there's just no distinction. But the really amazing quote in this particular issue was that Brian Burke got was a woman named Jakey Williams, who was a GLSEN activist and a teacher at a Packer Collegiate School in New York City. And she said they really want to get the portrayals, the positive portrayals of homosexuality starting in kindergarten. And she said, listen why. Because children at that age are, quote, developing their superego. And, quote, that's when the saturation process needs to begin. And she goes on to say, in her session was called Inclusive Kindergarten Workshop, because kindergarten's got to make sure, if you don't have a lot of homosexuals and transgenders in your kindergarten, I wouldn't send my kid there. In her Inclusive Kindergarten Workshop, Williams explained that, quote, 5-year-olds really are very interested in the big questions. They're very interested in sex, death, and love. And they ask those questions, and they talk about them, and we want to help them find the answers on their level. To initiate conversations, Williams said she has her class read a variety of books which endorse homosexuality, including, these are old ones, they've got like 1 million new ones now, and these were less oriented towards gender and more oriented towards homosexuality 24 years ago. The books then were Asha's Moms, My Two Uncles, Heather Has Two Mommies, which came out in 1989, by the way. 1989. We're looking at 35 years almost for Heather Has Two Mommies. Daddy's Roommate, which, by the way, we broke a story on Daddy's Roommate. It was published by a company called Allison Publications. Turns out Allison was the leading homosexual book publisher at the time, and we exposed that they had published pro-pedophile books. They also published a book with a story called, there's no kids here, Macho Sluts, which managed to have incest, pedophilia, and sadomasochism all in one story. So that was back then. And it's funny I read this newspaper, it seems so innocent compared to now. That's how bad. I got involved in this issue because I saw that there was this freight train coming of back then it was pretty much just LGBT. No, there was a T. The transgenders have always been a part of the movement. And this is one of my things, and Janet's heard me complain about it a million times. I can't stand this new effort by some conservatives to say, LGB is fine. We're just concerned about the T. Because that's artificial. It's all perversion. And besides, the LGBs, the only reason you have big trans is because they're copying big gay. Big gay paved the way. The gay lobby, it's really one of the most successful scams I think ever perpetrated in American culture and politics. Don't you think, Scott? I mean, it's totally phony. But they did it, and I'd like to describe some of the ways they did it. But before that, I wanted to give a quick shout out to a tribute to Judith Reisman, who recently passed away. There's a story here about Kinsey. We reviewed this book by James Jones. If you want to learn about Kinsey and you already read Judith Reisman's books, she was the leading exposer of Alfred Kinsey. Jim Jones was an honest liberal, and in this review, it's noted that Kinsey, among the most shocking secrets Jones uncovers, this is Alfred Kinsey, who is basically the basis for one of the third, as Dr. Van Meter said, of three leading lights for the sexual revolution. And really, in terms of the perversion movements, he was number one because the homosexuals loved how he exaggerated the numbers. His fake research exaggerated the numbers of homosexuals. He claimed that 37% of males in 1940, in the late 1940s, 37% of males had engaged in homosexual behavior. The way he got that was he went around and he interviewed sexual outlaws, criminals, and thanks to Judith and others, we've uncovered some of the people he interviewed. It turns out I was in Chicago for 17 years. He interviewed this perverted guy in Chicago who was a tattoo artist during the day, but then he was a hustler. He had thousands of sex partners, and Kinsey sought him out and did interviews with him. So Kinsey was this strange guy who I was going to read here, who was a homosexual himself, and he was into sadomasochism. He was into harming himself, actually. And he also involved his wife in his taped sex experiments. What a guy. And so I'm wondering, why is there still a Kinsey Institute in Indiana, University of Indiana? We had Me Too. We had all these crises. And yet we have Kinsey, who had Table 34. I don't know if it's up there. Oh, I don't know if my thing's up. You guys want to give to AFTA. Get out your checkbooks. Not very subtle here. Anyways, Table 34 is the sexual behavior in the human male, in which Kinsey evidently got data on child orgasms from a pedophile. So, of course, there's a double standard for everything. Had it been a conservative, had it been anybody else, it wouldn't be there. But it's still there. And in fact, I think they're erecting a statue to Kinsey somewhere. We ought to go over there and paper Table 34 all over it. It's just ridiculous. But he was a monster. But that's just one aspect. And Judith Reisman was, to her credit, she exposed him after the fact. One of the things it seems to me is that the Christians and the conservatives, a lot of times, we're like 10 to 20 years late. Like, now we're exposing all this LGBT stuff in schools, but it really needed to be done. We needed a bigger fight 20 years ago. This is an issue we did. We worked with Brian Kamaker, Mass Resistance, who's probably the leading. He's just a tremendous guy fighting the homosexual lobby, brave guy. And there was something we called Fistgate, in which GLSEN had a conference, and I can't really describe it, but one of the kids at the conference said, "What's fisting?" which is a grotesque sadomasochistic act. And they talked about it to the students, and somebody had a tape. Well, Brian Kamaker had the tape. Oh, there's table 34. See the time. It's the most sickening thing. And I always wondered, where were the Christians? I mean, why didn't somebody get the book and hound the guy? What happened? I think Judith's theory was they were all tired after the war, and people weren't paying attention. But he also did one on females, by the way, and I think the way he cheated on that one was he took common law relationships, and he called them, didn't he call them marriages? And he basically he made it. He considered them like marriages, even though they were common law. They weren't real marriages, and so then that allowed him to say that some absurd number, like upper 20s of women had committed adultery. So that's just Alfred Kinsey. But so we did a lot of reporting on that. We covered. We exposed how a group called the International Lesbian Gay Association, which is an international UN type of group. We found out, I got lucky, I asked them, I faxed them and said, can you send us your member list? It turns out 3 of their groups were pedophile organizations, including NAMBLA. So we reported that, and thanks to Jesse Helms, he used our research, and we got a law in the books, and it's still on the books, which bans, you cannot give U.S. taxpayer funds to any international organization that is linked to pedophilia. But I think what I wanted to talk about here is, first of all, let me see if I can. How do you get it to move? Oh. Oh, okay. Go ahead and move it. Okay. Well, there's. I don't know why that's next. I wasn't expecting. Oh, because we're already jumped ahead. Well, this is a guy named Frank Kameny who's in the Smithsonian. He was a very. He talked to me for some reason, but he's now being heralded to our children and everybody as a great civil rights figure. Well, he would go around and say he was a brilliant. He was an astronomer, and he got I think he got arrested for having I believe there was an incident in a park. A homosexual incident. Anyways, he was discovered he was homosexual. He got fired from the federal government, and he became really one of the earliest American homosexual activists. And what's interesting about Frank is that he would go around saying, gay is good, gay is godly. He would say these things, and he would just say them. And he would write letters to people, and he was just very, very radical. So I asked him about bestiality, and he told me, he emailed back, he said he didn't have a problem with bestiality, as long as the animal doesn't mind. And he called Christians Christiano-fascists, American Taliban. And so what I learned, just monitoring activists, is it's really, there's a lot of really radical, extreme behaviors, and a lot of wreckage and sadness. A lot of molestations in the lives of especially homosexual men, but also women. Here's Don Lemon, the CNN guy. Ever recognize him? Big liberal. And he's a out and proud homosexual, very much celebrated by the community. Well, he's just another quote-unquote gay man who got molested. Here in his book, he says he couldn't keep one particular teenager away. He was a teenage neighbor and a contemporary of one of my older sisters. I was only 5 years old at the time. It continued for years, and I wasn't the only victim. This individual would be known today as a predator. And, on and on it goes. It turns out his mother was involved in an adulterous relationship, and with a married man and was away a lot. And one of the burdens I have now is I think we need to compile this data, because I think you would find that an overwhelming number of VIP homosexual leading lights in the LGBT movement have some either abuse, terrible dysfunction, a very strained relationship with a parent, and it's not just a coincidence. You see it over and over again. And here's another guy we've written a lot about, Harvey Milk. And there's a Harvey Milk Day in California. Did people know that? He's a homosexual activist. He did the, let me see if I got it here. There he is. He wasn't the first homosexual politician, but he really was the first one to mobilize local homosexuals as his political base, and that's how he gained, he became a supervisor in San Francisco. This is a picture of him with a 16 or 17-year-old boy when Harvey Milk was 33 years old. So that's probably statutory rape. I haven't looked up the age of consent laws in New York at the time. But now look, it says Harvey with Milk. This is from this biography, which is really a hagiography. This is written by a homosexual journalist named Randy Schultz. Randy Schultz is a pretty honest journalist, much more honest than today's journalists. But he was homosexual. I think he was friendly with Milk. But notice the caption. Harvey Milk, and this is the kind of stuff you see all the time in the gay movement. Scott can attest to this. Just weird stuff. Harvey Milk with Jack Galen McKinley, the 17 or 16-year-old boy, and who later committed suicide, by the way, and their dog, Trick. Now, they have one dog named Trick and another dog named Trade. Those are two slang words for homosexual hustlers. So, 33-year-old man in a, quote, marriage, a sexual relationship with an underage boy. He names his dog, the boy was a runaway from Maryland. It's in the book. And then he names his dog after homosexual hustlers. Well, and that's the kind of life this guy lived, and yet I think he was on a stamp. Obama, I can't remember which president named he's got a naval vessel named at the USS Harvey Milk. And but here's the really sad part, I think, about this one, is that Harvey Milk was molested when he was a boy. And of course, you see this over and over again, too. And so when he was young, he was athletic and everything, and he apparently liked the theater. And his mother was so naive that she let him go to the Met, the famous theater in New York City, every week when he was, I think, 14 years old. So he went alone to New York City. Now listen to this. This is Randy Schultz. He says, he hung around the train. So he's observing New York. Describing Milk. He says they being homosexual men, they hung around the train depot. This is what his mother told him. I think she was trying to warn him. They hung around the train depot and did things to little boys. Minnie explained. Minnie was his mother. She never said exactly what they did, but the way she talked about it made Harvey realize that what they did was so bad it wasn't even supposed to be talked about. Okay, so the mother was not. Was not in favor of homosexuality. This is a long time ago. But then, when he goes to the theater, it says Harvey worried about during those times at the old Met. Sometimes he pushed back the wandering hands, but the dark tinglings were too powerful to be long denied. Random gropings led to brief trysts after the performances. This is a boy, right? And goes on to say that by the time he was 14, he was sexually active at the age of 14, and he went on to go have, commit sodomitic acts in parks and such. So I think the thing of all, what I really hate the most about this agenda is when you have somebody who was molested. I think David Pickup talked about it. You have somebody who was like Stephen, people who were molested, and yet they still just say that they're gay. They act as if the molestation which is actually a deviant sex molestation. So it's a double evil molestation, right? It's molestation is terrible enough. This is a perversion molestation, and we are to pretend or make believe that has nothing to do with the future embrace of a gay identity. And you see that over and over again. I think Don Lemon did the same thing. Don Lemon admits that he was molested as a boy, but somehow there's no connection. And it's just, I think Robert Riley put it best. He wrote a book, and I can't remember the name of it. Making Gay Okay. And his thesis is that one of the main motivators for the entire, affirming all the time homosexuality is rationalization. You have a driving need to rationalize your lifestyle, your chosen lifestyle. Everybody chooses their sexual behavior, and it's a rationalization. It's the most powerful motive you can have, right? And that's why it's so hard to change, and it's really hard once you've been in a long time. It's a miracle to get out for some of these guys who've been in for so many years. Well, let me, before I go further in here, and I can do this again. Oh, okay, I keep forgetting. The media, when I first started this, the media would call people from the other side. They'd call up a Scott Lively. They'd call up a Stephen Black. But those days are long gone. As you know, probably I would say the last 10 to 15 years, they don't call anybody on homosexuality. Now, they're doing it on transgender, but not even like they should on transgender issues. And you know how you prove that? In the presidential campaign, if there was anything resembling fairness in the media, the media would have pressed Biden on his transgender agenda. They knew he supported it, and they knew how controversial it was, but they didn't ask the questions because they were what? Protecting Biden. Their number one role was protecting Joe Biden. So what's their number one role with regard to homosexuality? Is protecting the gay movement, and they've become part of the LGBTQ movement. But now, today I was thinking, of course this has, this is very harmful when it comes to like conversion therapy, so-called. That's the boogeyman term for changing away from from unhealthy to a healthy lifestyle. They always find a word which is loaded. But the jaundiced media coverage, of course, helps the homosexuals with passage of those kind of laws because there's nobody holding the politicians accountable. However, I think there's one benefit that we really have to take advantage of, and DeSantis is doing it. If you have a little kid, and you turn him into he's your only child, you turn him into a spoiled brat, right? You give him everything he wants for his first 10 years, and something happens, and little Joey, all of a sudden he has to go live with his grandparents for the summer. But Grandma and Grandpa, they're disciplinarians. They don't put up with the baloney. What happens to Joey when he gets to Grandma and Grandpa's? He doesn't know how to behave. He's totally spoiled. And the homosexual lobby is completely spoiled in this culture debate. And so when Ron DeSantis comes back and is bam, bam, right away, after they say, they're counting on somebody like Mitt Romney. Oh, you're hurting gays in school. You're discriminating. He's right back the next day, hits it. And they don't know what to do because they're not used to debating. Well, I was a tennis player growing up. With my dad, I played all the time. And I noticed that when you play somebody who stinks at tennis, your game falls apart. You're not getting a shot back. You're not getting a good ball. You're getting these little things, you start dinking, and all of a sudden you can't serve, and everything falls apart. And these guys are not used to, they're getting it on the transgender issue. There's Breitbart, all the conservative media is lined up on the transgender issue because what does the conservative media do? For the most part, they do what's easier. But what's happened? The gay issue, the homosexual issue, most people think, that one, that's over. I'm moving on, right? That's unfortunately the attitude of most people. Why do we see opposition to or support for homosexual so-called marriage legalized, so-called, imposed by the Supreme Court? It's at 70% now, according to Gallup. And so I think this presents us an opportunity, because now that there's this rising criticism of what's going on in the schools, it affords us an opportunity to step in and engage with some really good activism, because these journalists are completely spoiled. GLAAD, which is another homosexual activist group, used to stand for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, but now it's just GLAAD. They are literally part of Hollywood. They have a show, an awards show, which is just like any other awards show, only it's giving all these actors, rewards for doing all these pro-homosexual things and pro-transgender. So that's just a thought there. I think we got to look for some good out of this. Could you go to the next one? Okay. I'm not going to read this whole quote, but this is, I think, one of the most fascinating quotes. This is Paul Johnson, conservative British historian, and who was it who was talking about Britain, the change in towards the sodomy laws, and what he's describing is how the conservatives and the people, they wanted to do something nice for the homosexuals. So they said, the criminalization, that's old fashioned. We don't have to do that. And you can read the quote. And then they were hoping that, everything was going to stay the same. Homosexuality would still be regarded as wrong and everything. And go to the next slide. What happened? They were totally mistaken. Decriminalization made it possible for homosexuals to organize openly into a powerful lobby, and thus it became a mere platform from which further demands were launched. Next followed demands for equality, in which homosexuality was officially placed on the same moral level as standard forms of sexuality. Sound familiar? Go down to the end. Thus we began by attempting to right what was felt an ancient injustice, so it began out of this do-gooder, we're nice, compassionate. And what did it turn into? And we ended up with a monster in our midst, powerful and clamoring, flexing its muscles, threatening, vengeful and vindictive towards anyone who challenges its outrageous claims, and bent on making fundamental and, to most of us, horrifying changes to civilized patterns of sexual behavior. And I think this is directly applicable to the Revoice debate, because what happens? Pride comes before the fall. And you know why? I've talked to gay activists now. I said, you know what one told me? He's a Catholic, total gay activist. He used to work for the National Catholic Reporter. He said, me and my friends, we're tired of the anti-gay polemics. See? You get to the point where you say, this is who I am. I don't even want to talk to you anymore. I don't even want to know you're there. And what do you think is going to happen to the Revoice people? I'm not saying all of them, but certainly some of them will be like, well, God loves me. I'm a gay Christian. Why wouldn't a loving God let me live out my love? Stephen Black gets to have a loving relationship. Why can't I have a loving relationship? Of course that's where it's going to go, because it always goes, because that's the whole, it's incremental. It's something about the way human beings are. It's the nature of rebellion. Sin doesn't stick in its corner. You could chart the course that Scott Lively has, the 5, because I had a slide in my other, I just didn't put it up here, of Scott's, he's absolutely right about it moves from tolerance to punishment. But it's an incredibly devious agenda, but it's really a media agenda. You even see media repeating really nasty, here's one making fun of a Catholic nun, their favorite target is Catholics. Pray away the gay, it's a snarky little slogan. You think you can pray and overcome homosexuality? I have actually heard some ex-gay leaders using pray away the gay. What are they thinking? This is not a slogan. We shouldn't use conversion therapy. We shouldn't use their language. That was invented, I think, by Wayne Besson, by the way, a homosexual activist. Pray away the gay. Here's another one. Instead of Psalm 139, right? Fearfully and wonderfully made. What do they call it? Queerfully and wonderfully made. You could find 1,000 of these. Faith is and religion is just for many of the hardened homosexual activists, it's just a butt of jokes. But this is really interesting. I read a couple of quotes from this one. Queerfully and wonderfully made, a guide for LGBTQ plus Christian teens. Right? Listen to this one. It says, one of the chapters is called "What If I Want to Change?" And the advice is, "Dear one, we would ask you gently, why do you want to change? The voice in your head telling you to change is not God's voice." God's voice. God says that you are loved, valuable, and wonderful, italics, just as you are. Your queerness is God's creation, and it is perfect. So this is the kind of thing that's all over the place the kids are getting access to. And could you move it again? Okay, now this is the most amazing poll I've seen since I've been doing this. This is Gen Z, which is, you can see the dates there, born 1997 to 2003. 1 in 5, 20.8%, or I thought that was 3, but I think it's an 8. 1 in 5 Gen Zers are identifying as LGBTQ, and then millennials is also high. Millennials is 10.5. Now look at the traditionalists. That would be, the old geezers. 0.8, baby boomers. I'm a baby boomer. I just made it. 2.6%. Those are the numbers we grew up with. In fact, see the 2.6 and the 4.2? One of the homosexual propaganda tricks was they created the 10% myth. They would say 10%. They would write books called One in 10 Teachers Are Gay. And they do all this because they wanted to exaggerate their power to grow their power. Well, now we're actually reaching the point where I think they're now at 7.1% for the whole population. Within another 10 years, if trends continue, they might actually hit the 10% myth, which was the actual propaganda number from before. Kinsey, yeah, but it was a distortion of Kinsey, right? Or did Kinsey intentionally create that distortion? Yeah. So go ahead to the next one. Okay, now this is, there it is. Let's just look at the jump there. And I'm not sure how fully accurate these are because, I know you've got a lot of girls who say they think it turns the guys on if they say they're bisexual and stuff. But regardless, even if it's 5 percentage points off, that's astonishing. And the propaganda works. And you've got the media, which are basically serving. Picture how much the media did for Joe Biden to get him elected. Almost everything, right? They let the guy campaign in his basement, for goodness sake. They did more for the homosexual movement. And they're trying to do it for the transgenders, but the transgender is just a road too far. It's a step too far. Satan just took it one step too far. Because it's so self-evident. You can't hide when you've got Leah Thomas. I don't think I have a slide. This big burly guy, towering over the female competitors. It's just too much. It's too much to hide. Okay, next one. Okay, that's just the Gallup conclusion that they're headed for 10%. Okay, next. Okay, I call this the X factor. This is polling for gay marriages, so-called. I never put it not in quotes. I hate it when conservatives call it a marriage like it is. Words have consequences. How can we give up words? Whoever controls the words controls the debate. Look at that X factor. 68% were opposed in 1996, it looks like. Now that's down to 29%. It went from 27% in 97 to 70% supporting. And of course, the decision in 2015, the Obergefell decision, which was imposed by the Supreme Court, that had a huge effect because the law is a teacher and people tend to be, they just follow, and I even have friends who are like, they're conservative and they just, you can't win that one. And you'll notice on this whole debate, talk about Roe, nobody wants to say that Roe is precedent. Well, if Roe's not precedent, how can Obergefell v. Hodges be precedent? That was just 7 years ago. So Trump's most egregious error in my book, well, it's right up there. One is he's promoting the normalization of homosexuality all over the globe by targeting Rick Grinnell as a homosexual activist. Good guy otherwise, but conservative and everything, but he's not on this issue. So Trump is promoting the acceptance of homosexual, taking down laws like we had, Lawrence v. Texas, up to what, 2001, 2003 was that? 2003, I think. I think the biggest mistake Trump made was when he sat down with Leslie Stahl, remember? and she asked him about gay marriage, so-called, and he said, "Oh, that's over. That issue's over." He gave up. He gave up the ghost. Now that's where I think Christians should have stepped in and said, "Come on, you can't give up on that." But we cannot give up on marriage. We just can't. Okay, next. Okay, these are just some quick tactics. There's the 10% visibility, of course. It's a lot of this is emotional manipulation. I think the coming out is the most important thing, because on so many levels it's manipulative, right? Because you know me and you love me, you have to accept anything I do. We don't do that for children. It is really manipulative. But that was this guy. That was Harvey Milk's genius, evil genius, coming out. Portray gays as victims. That's obvious. That's Kirk and Madsen, who are two writers, homosexual activists. They wrote a book about how to win the war on homosexuality from their perspective. So you'll notice they're always portraying gays as victims, but they're trying it on trans, and guess what? Once again, a step too far. Because you'll notice they haven't figured out their messaging yet. They're trying to say, "Oh, the poor athletes, they just want to compete." Well, people want to let them compete, but maybe they're just going to have to compete against other trans athletes, because the total sympathy is on the side of the female athletes. And the sympathy is on the side of the female athletes who are in the locker room with Leo Thomas with his male genitalia. I mean, that's ridiculous. And so they're not winning the victim, and also when it gets out how grotesque these operations are, and the fact that underage girls are having their healthy breasts surgically removed, I think it's only going to go up for us on the transgender issue. The question is, will we stay true to it? Now, let me say something about I'm running out of time here, so let me say something about the conservative Republicans. This is, I think, a real important area for us, and we have to engage. We just have to engage, and we need good ideas, because think about who the most effective activists are. None of us are going to listen to some crazy gay activist Democrat marching down in a pride parade in Boston. But when Bruce Jenner, a.k.a. Caitlyn Jenner, I'm still going to call him, he's still a man, can't change your DNA. When Bruce Jenner gets up and gets hired by Fox News, and the CEO of Fox News calls him in a press release a trailblazer for LGBT rights, Bruce Jenner is going to win, Caitlyn Jenner is going to win over a lot of conservatives and people of faith. We've seen it. Fox News somehow, and I wrote a 90,000-word essay on Fox News pro-gay bias several years ago, and I got to write the second half because that was like almost 10 years ago. But somehow Fox News became a propaganda organ for homosexual so-called conservatives. You got Tammy Bruce. I have a story I could tell you about her because she nailed me once when she was a lesbian activist. She tricked me and she posed as a violent homophobe on radio. And then she tried to goad me into making violent remarks. Because I had put out a press release about Disney, because we were protesting Disney 25 years ago. So we put out a press release because Disneyland would have Gay Day. They were just starting Gay Day. But they don't tell the people coming, they don't say, "Hey, let everybody know it's Gay Day. Thousands of homosexual couples around your kids." No, you come, you spend $1,000, you go to Disneyland, and guess what? It's Gay Day. So we put out a press release saying this is wrong. Well, Tammy Bruce now, and I agree with her about 90% of issues. But again, on this issue, she's not a conservative, right? She's a revolutionary. So she posed as a homophobe, and she said stuff like, "Well, don't you just get so mad you want to punch him?" And I'm sitting in there on the radio. I'm on the other end of a radio interview. I'm like, "No, I don't want to punch him." And then she goes at the end, she says, "Well, I have something to tell you. I'm Tammy Bruce, and I'm the most powerful out lesbian on the West Coast, and you have 30 seconds to respond." And I'm shaking, and basically I just got the words out, and I said, "Look, we don't hate anybody. Disagreement is not hate. One person's bigotry is another person's morality. And we cannot let the left be the arbiter of what is love, what is hate, what is civility, what are all these things. But that's what they do. The Southern Poverty Law Center is still being used as a moral arbiter on this issue. They are a far-left Looney Tune organization. They're so bad, they once confused me with Paul Cameron, I guess because we're both fight the gay agenda and we're both white guys. They called me, they meant to say me, but they put Paul Cameron or vice versa, and they put that in one of their articles. This is the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is used by the media as a sort of a moral arbiter. And so, but back to the gay conservatives before I'm done here. I really think we've got to lobby Trump, if Trump runs again, or any candidate, Democrat or Republican. Look, there's no Republican exception in Romans 1. You know, you don't get to say, oh, well, but I thought I didn't have to worry about that one because I'm a Republican. I'm a libertarian. I've actually heard Greg Gutfeld say this a couple times now. Greg Gutfeld's otherwise he's brilliant libertarian, albeit libertarian conservative on Fox News. He's the guy, short guy, very funny, very smart. But you know what his line is? Scott, you won't believe this. He says the problem with the transgender issue is it's ruining it for gay men because all these guys who are becoming trans would end up being healthy gay men. This is the line he's saying on Fox News. So we have got to, and I think the way we start is by talking to start local. All politics is local. Start with your most local person. Literally find out. How many of you know who your local state rep is? Could you say their name? Who could say theirs? A few people, like 5, know your, okay. How about your local senator, state senator? Okay, call them up because they want to hear from people. And every call represents like 50 calls. If they get a call, tell them that you want to stick to the Republican platform. You don't want support for homosexuality. You don't want support for transgenderism. Bring up these issues and talk to your local, and then work up from there. And we've got to start a movement to reclaim. I guess we could maybe start on marriage, but we cannot allow the Republican Party to ditch this just willy-nilly. And it's happening right before our eyes because a lot of conservatives, they say, this is hard. Unlike abortion, where there's a powerful consensus because there's decades of power built behind the pro-life cause, we don't have that. If we had that kind of power, Scott Lively wouldn't be working alone. Stephen Black would have a $5 million budget. I think the budgets of the transgender groups now dwarf the entire pro-family movement fighting big LGBT. In fact, I'm 100% confident, because I just got a Richard Viguerie email, understand this one. The entire you take all the transgender groups, their budget dwarfs, if you took all the pro-family groups, I'm talking the ones fighting this culture war issue, I'm pretty sure, and I'll check it, and I'll correct myself if I'm wrong, but I think the transgender groups alone outspend us. Because that's how committed they are. And I'll end with this. The saddest thing, I think, in this line of work is that, and this is something we need to repent, I guess, is that the people on the side of the lies have more commitment to their lies than most Christians have to God's truth. And we all should repent of that. But thank you very much.